The African wilderness fell into an eerie silence as Ranger Marcus spotted something that defied everything he knew about predator behavior. Two massive lions stood directly in his path, blocking the dusty trail that wound through the scattered thorn bush. But these weren't the calculated territorial displays he'd witnessed countless times before. The lioness paced frantically, her powerful frame trembling with an emotion that transcended the usual rules of the savanna. Her mate, a magnificent male with a dark mane, stood frozen beside her, his amber eyes locked onto Marcus with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. What happened next would challenge every assumption about the relationship between humans and the most feared predators on Earth. The lioness began moving toward Marcus's vehicle, not with the predatory stealth of a hunter, but with the desperate urgency of a parent in crisis. She would take several quick steps forward, then spin around and bound back toward a specific area behind the acacia trees, looking over her shoulder repeatedly. Her roars weren't the territorial warnings Marcus had learned to recognize during his 15 years patrolling these remote regions. These were sounds of pure, raw anguish. The male lion remained stationary, but his deep, guttural calls seemed directed at something beyond Marcus's sight. Every few seconds, he would lower his massive head toward the ground, then lift it again, his gaze alternating between the hidden area and Marcus's stunned face. This wasn't aggression. This wasn't a territorial dispute. This was something Marcus had never encountered in all his years working with African wildlife. These apex predators were actively trying to communicate with him, overriding millions of years of evolutionary programming that should have kept them far from any human presence. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, his mind racing through the possibilities. Two adult lions in a state of extreme distress, positioned between him and whatever crisis lay hidden in the brush, represented one of the most dangerous scenarios he could face. A single miscalculation, one wrong movement, and he would become prey to creatures capable of crushing his skull with their jaws. Yet something in their behavior suggested this encounter was different from anything documented in wildlife behavioral studies. The lioness's movements became more frantic. She would rush toward Marcus, stop just meters from his vehicle, and release a series of short, urgent vocalizations that seemed almost like attempts at conversation. Her body language spoke of desperation rather than dominance. When she realized Marcus wasn't following, she would return to her mate, and together they would look toward the concealed area with what could only be described as helpless panic. Marcus Hay of African Wildlife spent years learning to read the subtle communications. He understood the difference between a warning growl and a territorial roar, between defensive posturing and aggressive intent. But this situation existed outside every behavioral pattern he'd studied. These lions weren't just tolerating his presence. They were actively seeking his involvement in whatever crisis had driven them to this unprecedented act of interspecies appeal. The implications were staggering. Lions don't ask humans for help. They don't override their fundamental predatory instincts to engage in complex communication with their natural enemies. Yet here they stood, two of Africa's most formidable predators, practically begging him to follow them toward something he couldn't see but clearly posed a threat far greater than his presence. Marcus realized this moment would define not just his career, but possibly his life. Every protocol he'd been taught said to maintain distance, to avoid any direct engagement with distressed predators. But the raw desperation in their eyes, the complete abandonment of their natural wariness around humans, suggested something catastrophic had occurred, something that had driven these magnificent creatures to take themselves to an ultimate risk of expose human in their moment of greatest vulnerability. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Marcus knew that whatever decision he made in the next few seconds would cascade into consequences he couldn't predict. Following two agitated lions into unknown territory violated every safety regulation in his training manual. but ignoring their obvious plea for assistance would haunt him forever if his suspicions about their crisis proved correct. The lioness made one final approach, this time moving with slow, deliberate steps that brought her within touching distance of his vehicle. She placed her massive paws on the ground and looked directly into Marcus's eyes through the windshield. In that moment, he saw something that transcended species boundaries. He saw the universal expression of a parent facing the unthinkable loss of their young. The male lion joined her, positioning himself beside the vehicle's passenger side. Together, they created a corridor that clearly indicated the direction they wanted him to travel. Their message couldn't have been clearer if they had spoken in perfect English. They needed him to follow them, and they needed him to follow them now. Marcus took a deep breath and made his choice. He slowly engaged the engine, keeping his movements predictable and non-threatening. The lions immediately responded by moving ahead of his vehicle, maintaining a steady pace that allowed him to follow while never losing sight of their destination. The lioness would periodically look back to ensure he was still behind them, her relief palpable each time she confirmed his continued presence. They traveled deeper into the wilderness, away from the established patrol routes Marcus knew so well. The terrain became rougher, dotted with rocky outcroppings and dense patches of vegetation that could easily conceal danger. But the lions moved with purpose, navigating through areas that would have taken Marcus hours to traverse safely on foot. As they approached a clearing surrounded by fever trees, the source of their desperation finally became visible. Marcus brought his vehicle to a stop and felt his heart sink as he understood the full scope of the tragedy unfolding before him. Hidden beneath a canopy of fallen branches and debris was a collapsed excavation site, probably an old mining attempt or water well that had been abandoned and forgotten. The earthen walls had given way, creating a deep pit filled with muddy water and loose soil. From somewhere within that treacherous hole came the faint, desperate cries of a young voice. The lions had led him to their cub, trapped in what had become a death trap disguised as innocent ground. The lioness rushed to the edge of the collapse, her claws scraping uselessly against the unstable earth as she tried to reach her young. Every attempt only caused more soil to crumble into the pit, making the situation more dangerous for the trapped cub below. Marcus realized he was looking at a rescue scenario that would test every skill he possessed and push him far beyond the boundaries of conventional wildlife management. The cub's survival depended entirely on his ability to navigate this crisis, while working alongside two of nature's most powerful predators who had placed their complete trust in his hands. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and time was running out with each passing minute. Marcus assessed the deadly situation with the methodical precision that had kept him alive through countless dangerous encounters. The pit stretched approximately 12 feet across, with walls that had partially collapsed inward, creating an unstable funnel of loose earth and stagnant water. The cub's cries grew weaker with each passing moment, indicating exhaustion and possible hypothermia from prolonged exposure to the cold, muddy conditions below. The lioness continued her frantic attempts to reach her offspring, her powerful claws digging furrows in the soft earth around the pit's edge. But every movement only accelerated the collapse, sending cascades of soil tumbling down toward the trapped cub. The male lion positioned himself on the opposite side, his massive frame trembling with the restraint required to resist his paternal instincts to leap into the pit himself. Both parents understood, at some primal level, that their strength had become a liability in this delicate rescue scenario. Marcus retrieved his emergency equipment from the vehicle, his hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. The rescue rope, aluminum ladder sections, and portable winch represented his best hope of extracting the cub without triggering a complete collapse that would bury the young lion alive. But working this close to two agitated adult lions created additional complications that no training manual had ever addressed. The lioness watched his every movement with laser focus, her amber eyes tracking each piece of equipment as he assembled his makeshift rescue system. She seemed to understand that his preparations were connected to her cub's survival, but her natural protective instincts warred with the necessity of allowing this human to work mere feet from her position. Every few seconds, she would release a low vocalization that seemed directed toward the pit, as if reassuring her trapped offspring that help was coming. Marcus began constructing a stabilized platform using the ladder sections, creating a bridge that would distribute his weight across the pit's unstable rim. The engineering challenge was immense. Too much concentrated pressure would trigger another collapse, but the platform had to be strong enough to support both his weight and the additional strain of pulling the cub to safety. The margin for error was essentially zero. The male lion moved closer to Marcus's working area, his massive presence both intimidating and oddly comforting. Rather than displaying aggression, the lion seemed to position himself as a guardian, watching the surrounding area for any additional threats that might compromise the rescue effort. His protective stance suggested he understood that Marcus represented their cub's only chance for survival, and he was prepared to defend that opportunity against any interference. As Marcus tested the stability of his improvised platform, the cub's cries suddenly became more urgent. The young lion had spotted the rescue preparations above and was attempting to climb the muddy walls of its prison. But the effort only resulted in more soil sliding down into the pit, and the cub's panicked struggling threatened to exhaust its remaining strength reserves. The lioness responded immediately to her offspring's distress, moving to the very edge of the pit and releasing a series of soft, rhythmic vocalizations. The sounds had an immediate calming effect on the trapped cub, whose frantic movements gradually subsided. Marcus realized he was witnessing a form of long-distance parental communication that transcended the physical barriers separating mother and child. The lioness was using her voice to maintain emotional contact with her cub, providing comfort and stability during the most terrifying experience of its young life. Marcus secured the rescue rope to his vehicle's tow hitch, creating an anchor point that would allow him to descend into the pit while maintaining a safety line. The descent would be the most dangerous part of the operation. The pit's walls were saturated with water and completely unstable, offering no reliable handholds or footing. One wrong move would send him tumbling into the same trap that had claimed the cub, turning a rescue mission into a double fatality. The lioness seemed to sense the critical nature of this moment. She moved to a position where she could observe both Marcus and the pit simultaneously, her body coiled with tension, but her movements carefully controlled. The male lion took up a similar position on the opposite side, creating a protective perimeter around the rescue site. Their thinking that defied conventional understanding of lion coordination was remarkable level of tactical, suggesting a behavior. Marcus began his descent, testing each foothold before committing his full weight to the unstable surface. The walls of the pit were treacherous, composed of loose clay and rock fragments that shifted under even minimal pressure. Water seeped continuously from the surrounding earth, creating a slick coating that made every movement perilous. The cub watched his approach with wide, terrified eyes, too exhausted to flee, but still alert enough to track this strange creature entering its underground prison. The rescue rope provided Marcus's only connection to safety as he worked his way deeper into the pit. Above him, both parent lions maintained their vigil, their massive heads silhouetted against the sky as they monitored his progress. The lioness released occasional soft calls that seemed intended to encourage both Marcus and her trapped offspring, creating a surreal soundtrack to one of the most dangerous rescue attempts ever undertaken in the African wilderness. As Marcus reached the bottom of the pit, he found himself face to face with the exhausted cub. The young lion was covered in mud, shivering from cold and trauma, but still alive and responsive. Its eyes reflected a mixture of fear and desperate hope as Marcus slowly extended his hand toward the small, trembling form. This moment would determine whether months of trust-building between species could overcome millions of years of predator-prey programming. The cub's survival hung in the balance, dependent on Marcus's ability to complete the most delicate phase of the rescue, while working under the watchful eyes of two of Africa's apex predators. The moment Marcus's fingers matted fur, the young lion's entire contact with the cub's matte body went instinct screamed at the rigid with terror. Every small creature to flee from this unfamiliar predator, but exhaustion and hypothermia had sapped its strength to dangerous levels. Marcus could feel the rapid flutter of the cub's heartbeat through its muddy coat, a frantic rhythm that spoke of a body pushed far beyond its limits. The cub's breathing was shallow and labored, each breath a struggle against the cold that had settled deep into its bones. Above them, the lioness released a series of urgent vocalizations that seemed designed to calm her offspring's panic. The sounds carried a maternal authority that transcended species boundaries, and Marcus watched in amazement as the cub's trembling gradually subsided in response to its mother's voice. The young lion's eyes remained fixed on Marcus, but the wild panic was replaced by a wary acceptance that suggested some primitive understanding of the rescue attempt. Marcus worked with painstaking care to position the rescue harness around the cub's small frame. The improvised restraint system had to be secure enough to support the young lion's weight during the ascent, but gentle enough to avoid causing additional injury to a body already traumatized by hours of exposure to the brutal conditions. Every movement had to be deliberate and non-threatening, as any sudden action could trigger a panic response that would doom the rescue attempt. The cub's condition was worse than Marcus had initially assessed. Its left rear leg hung at an unnatural angle, suggesting a fracture sustained during the initial fall into the pit. The injury explained why the young lion had been unable to climb out on its own, trapped not just by the unstable walls, but by its own damaged limb. The discovery added a new layer of complexity to the rescue operation, as any mishandling during the extraction could transform a treatable fracture into a life-threatening compound break. Marcus tested the harness connections one final time before signaling his readiness to begin the ascent. The lioness responded immediately, positioning herself at the optimal angle to observe the extraction process. Her massive paws gripped the earth at the pit's edge with such force that her claws left deep gouges in the soil. The male lion moved to the opposite side, creating a balanced observation point that would allow both parents to monitor their cub's progress toward safety. The first few feet of the ascent proved the most treacherous. The cub's additional weight created new stress points on the unstable walls, causing small avalanches of mud and debris to cascade into the pit below. Marcus had to pause repeatedly to allow the disturbances to settle, knowing that any major collapse could sever the rescue rope or bury them both under tons of saturated earth. The margin between success and catastrophe measured in inches rather than feet. Halfway up the pit wall, disaster nearly struck. A section of earth the size of a dinner table broke away from the wall directly above them, plummeting toward Marcus and the cub with lethal force. Marcus pressed himself and his precious cargo against the opposite wall, feeling chunks of clay and rock whistle past his head as they tumbled into the depths below. The near miss sent a cascade of loose soil raining down on them, temporarily obscuring vision and making breathing difficult in the dust-filled air. The lioness's roar of alarm echoed across the wilderness, a sound of pure maternal terror that seemed to shake the very ground. Her instinct was to leap into the pit herself, to place her own body between her cub and the falling debris, but some deeper wisdom held her back. She understood that any additional weight or movement could trigger a complete collapse that would doom all three creatures trapped in this deadly scenario. Marcus resumed the ascent with renewed urgency, knowing that each passing minute increased the likelihood of another potentially fatal collapse. The cub had gone completely limp in the harness, either from exhaustion or shock, its small body offering no resistance to the extraction process. The lack of movement was both a blessing and a concern, making the rescue easier but raising questions about the young lion's overall condition. As they approached the final few feet of the ascent, Marcus encountered the most challenging obstacle yet. The pit's rim had been undermined by the earlier collapses, creating an overhang that blocked their direct path to safety. The unstable lip of earth jutted out over the pit like a natural trap, forcing Marcus to navigate around the obstruction while maintaining his grip on both the rescue rope and the unconscious cub. The solution required a dangerous maneuver that would expose them both to maximum risk. Marcus had to swing laterally across the pit face, using his momentum to carry them around the overhang and up to a more stable section of the rim. The technique demanded perfect timing and coordination, as any miscalculation would send them crashing back into the depths they had fought so hard to escape. The lioness seemed to understand the critical nature of this moment. She moved to the section of rim that Marcus was targeting, her massive frame serving as both a visual guide and a source of stability for the final phase of the rescue. Her amber eyes locked onto Marcus's face with an intensity that conveyed both desperate trust. In hope and absolute barriers between that moment, the dater and human dissolved completely, replaced by a shared commitment to saving the life of an innocent creature. Marcus executed the swing with surgical precision, using his years of climbing experience to carry both himself and the cub around the deadly overhang. The rescue rope creaked under the sudden lateral stress, but the anchor point held firm. For a heart-stopping moment, they dangled over the pit's center, suspended between life and death by a thin strand of synthetic fiber. Then Marcus's boots found purchase on solid ground, and he hauled both himself and the cub over the rim to safety. The lioness was beside them instantly, her massive head lowering to examine her rescued offspring. She began a thorough inspection of the cub's condition, her rough tongue working to clean away the mud and debris that coated its small form. The young lion stirred weakly at its mother's touch, releasing a faint mewl that brought visible relief to both parent lions. The sound confirmed that despite its ordeal, the cub retained enough strength to respond to familiar stimuli. Marcus carefully removed the rescue harness, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid alarming the reunited family. The cub's injured leg would require immediate medical attention, but the fracture appeared to be a clean break that could heal properly with appropriate treatment. The young lion's core body temperature was dangerously low, but its breathing had stabilized now that it was free from the pit's crushing psychological pressure. The male lion approached the rescue site with measured steps, his enormous frame radiating protective energy as he surveyed his family's condition. He positioned himself between Marcus and the lioness, not as a threat, but as a guardian ensuring the safety of this unprecedented interspecies cooperation. His presence created a buffer zone that allowed the reunion to proceed while maintaining appropriate boundaries between predator and human. Marcus began gathering his equipment, preparing for the delicate process of withdrawing from this extraordinary encounter. The rescue had succeeded beyond his wildest hopes, but the most dangerous phase was yet to come. How do you disengage from two adult lions who have just entrusted you with their most precious possession? How do you transition from trusted ally back to potential threat in the span of a few careful movements? The answer would determine whether this remarkable story of cooperation would end in triumph or tragedy, as the fundamental laws of the African wilderness reasserted themselves over the temporary alliance that had made this miracle possible. The lioness continued her meticulous examination of the rescued cub, her massive tongue working across every inch of its muddy coat with the precision of a medical professional. Each stroke removed layers of contaminated debris while simultaneously checking for additional injuries that might have gone unnoticed during the chaotic extraction. Marcus observed this intimate process from a respectful distance, marveling at the tenderness displayed by one of nature's most feared predators. The contrast between the lioness's capacity for devastating violence and her gentle ministrations to her offspring challenged every assumption about the emotional complexity of wild animals. The male lion maintained his protective stance, but his posture had shifted subtly from defensive alertness to watchful gratitude. His amber eyes tracked Marcus's every movement without the predatory calculation that had defined their earlier encounter. Instead, there was something approaching recognition in his gaze, an acknowledgement that transcended the traditional boundaries between species. This massive predator, capable of bringing down prey 3 times his size, was displaying a form of respect that defied conventional understanding of lion behavior. The cub's responses to its mother's attention grew stronger with each passing minute. What had begun as barely perceptible movements gradually developed into weak but determined attempts to stand. Its injured leg remained non-functional, causing the young lion to stumble repeatedly. But the return of motor function represented a crucial indicator of neurological recovery. Marcus recognized these positive signs, while simultaneously noting the urgency of getting proper veterinary care for the fracture and potential hypothermia. As the immediate crisis subsided, Marcus faced a dilemma that no wildlife management protocol had ever addressed. Standard procedure demanded immediate withdrawal from any close encounter with potentially dangerous predators, but these circumstances existed far outside the realm of standard protocol. The lions had demonstrated unprecedented trust by allowing him to rescue their offspring, and his abrupt departure might be interpreted as abandonment or betrayal by creatures who had just experienced the deepest form of interspecies cooperation. The solution emerged through careful observation of the lion's body language and behavioral cues. The lioness had begun moving her cub away from the collapsed pit, supporting its weight while encouraging small steps toward a grove of fever trees that offered both shelter and concealment. Her movements were deliberate and purposeful, indicating a planned relocation to a more secure environment where the family could recover from their traumatic ordeal. This natural withdrawal provided Marcus with the opportunity to disengage without appearing to abandon his newfound allies. Marcus began his own strategic retreat, moving in slow, predictable patterns that telegraphed his intentions without creating alarm. He gathered his equipment methodically, ensuring each action was visible to both parent lions so they could monitor his activities and confirm he posed no threat during this vulnerable transition period. The rescue rope was coiled with exaggerated care, the ladder sections disassembled with deliberate precision, every movement designed to communicate respect and peaceful intent. The male lion responded to Marcus's withdrawal by adjusting his own position, creating a mobile protective perimeter around his family while maintaining visual contact with the human who had just saved his offspring's life. This complex choreography of disengagement required both species to navigate uncharted territory in predator-human relations, relying on universal signals of non-aggression and mutual respect to avoid triggering defensive responses that could shatter their fragile alliance. Of equipment into his vehicle, as Marcus loaded the last piece, Lioness paused in her assistance to the injured cub and turned toward him. The moment stretched across the African wilderness like a bridge between 2 entirely different worlds, connecting predator and human through shared experience and mutual understanding. Her gaze held none of the wariness that typically characterized lion-human encounters. Instead, there was something that could only be described as acknowledgement, a recognition of debt and gratitude that transcended the barriers of species and language. The cub, supported by its mother's strength, but maintaining its own precarious balance on 3 functional legs, also turned toward Marcus. Despite its youth and traumatic experience, the young lion seemed to understand that this strange creature had played a crucial role in its rescue. Its eyes, no longer clouded by fear and exhaustion, focused on Marcus with an intensity that suggested memory formation, the creation of an indelible impression that would influence its future responses to human presence. Marcus slowly raised his hand in a gesture of farewell, keeping his movements gentle and non-threatening while acknowledging the profound connection that had developed during their shared crisis. The lioness responded with a soft vocalization, a sound unlike any territorial roar or warning growl he had ever documented. This was communication on a different level entirely, a form of cross-species dialogue that researchers had theorized about, but never actually witnessed in the wild. The male lion added his own vocal contribution to this unprecedented exchange, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. The sound carried undertones of gratitude mixed with the promise of protection, as if this magnificent predator was offering assurance that Marcus would always be recognized as an ally rather than a threat in his territory. The implications were staggering from both a scientific and personal perspective, suggesting that individual relationships between humans and wild lions could transcend instinctual programming under extraordinary circumstances. Marcus started his vehicle's engine with careful deliberation, allowing the sound to gradually increase so the lions could adjust to the mechanical noise without alarm. The family group had moved approximately 50 meters from the rescue site, positioning themselves near the fever trees, where they could observe his departure while maintaining their own security. The strategic placement demonstrated tactical thinking that went beyond simple parental protection, indicating a level of situational awareness that incorporated both immediate safety and long-term territorial considerations. As he began driving away from the site, Marcus glanced repeatedly in his rearview mirror to monitor the lion's response to his departure. Rather than displaying relief at his withdrawal, both parent lions maintained their watchful positions, tracking his vehicle's progress across the savanna. Their attention seemed focused not on ensuring his departure, but on committing his presence to memory, creating lasting recognition patterns that would influence future encounters throughout their shared territory. The rescued cub remained visible between its parents, its small form a testament to the extraordinary events that had just unfolded in this remote corner of the African wilderness. Despite its injury and traumatic experience, the young lion appeared alert and responsive, suggesting that both its physical and psychological recovery were progressing favorably. The successful rescue represented more than just the saving of a single life. It had demonstrated the potential for cooperation between species that had evolved as natural adversaries. The implications of this encounter would extend far beyond the immediate rescue scenario. Marcus realized he had participated in something unprecedented in documented wildlife behavior, a spontaneous alliance between predator and human that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between civilization and the natural world. The scientific community would struggle to categorize and explain what had occurred, but the emotional and practical reality was undeniable. Trust had been established where none should have existed. As the distance increased between Marcus and the lion family, he began processing the full magnitude of what had just transpired. The successful rescue would certainly be documented and reported through official channels, but the deeper significance of the interspecies cooperation would require careful consideration and analysis. How do you quantify trust between natural enemies? How do you measure the value of a single life saved through unprecedented collaboration? The answers to these questions would emerge over time, but one immediate truth was already evident. Both Marcus and the lions had been permanently changed by their shared experience, forever connected by a bond that transcended the traditional boundaries between predator and prey, between wild and civilized, between species that should have remained eternal adversaries in the harsh mathematics of survival. The dust settled on the African savanna as Marcus drove toward the horizon, leaving behind a scene that would forever alter his understanding of the wild. What had begun as a routine patrol had transformed into an extraordinary testament to the power of trust between the most unlikely allies. The lioness and her mate had made a choice that defied millions of years of evolutionary programming, placing their faith in the very species they were hardwired to fear. Their desperate gamble had paid off, but the true reward extended far beyond the successful rescue of their injured cub. This incredible encounter proves that compassion knows no boundaries, that the instinct to protect the innocent can bridge even the deepest divisions between predator and human. The lioness who begged for help, the male lion who stood guard during the rescue, and the ranger who risked everything to answer their plea had created something unprecedented in the African wilderness. They had demonstrated that empathy is indeed a universal language, spoken not in words, but in actions that transcend the barriers of species and survival. The rescued cub would heal from its injuries and grow strong under the protection of parents who had learned that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. Marcus would carry the memory of those amber eyes and grateful vocalizations for the rest of his career, knowing that he had participated in something that challenged every textbook and redefined the possible.